In 1730, one of the most consequential conflicts of early American history happened right here, in this pasture. It was the climax of what the French called the Fox Wars, the conflicts between several Algonquian-speaking groups like the Meskwaki, Illinois, and many other groups loosely allied to the French in this period. Here in this place, the Meskwaki, who were on their way to the east to seek refuge among the Iroquois, found their travel blocked by enemies and hard weather. And so they dug in, creating an impressive fortification out of trees, earth, and whatever material came to hand. It was summertime. It was hot. Groups like the Illinois and Odawa surrounded the Meskwaki and for weeks laid siege. Finally, at the end of the summer, the Meskwaki tried to escape, and a pitched battle ensued. It was one of the most devastating and consequential battles of early American history, changing the course of Indigenous power in the Midwest.
Historians have long interpreted the Fox Wars as some of the most intense colonial American wars, a manifestation of the extreme violence, if not genocidal violence, that colonization wrought on Indigenous peoples. To explain the motives behind the wars, historians have often centered factors like the fur trade, France's unusual imperial system, and the animosities and conflicts that it engendered among Indigenous peoples. They have centered the destruction caused by disease or guns or other exogenous factors introduced into Indigenous peoples' traditional lives.
What historians have never emphasized in their discussion of these important Indigenous conflicts, however, is their setting, the place where they happened.
My fascination with the prairie landscape really started with running. I was lucky to be on a cross-country team for the little college I attended in Minnesota. I was never a gifted runner, but I loved it. And the thing I loved best was how running put me in touch with this amazing landscape and revealed it. I have never lost that enthusiasm or sense of place.
It's counterintuitive. Driving across the landscape of the American Midwest today, it is hard to see what once made this region so special. It is monotonous. It is flat. It is monocultural. To some, the spare, austere landscape has a beauty all its own, of course. But to many, it seems dull and boring. But before it became the monocultural Corn Belt, the heart of the Midwestern region was the opposite of homogeneous. Indeed, rather than a consistent zone of singularity, the region was defined by a huge and dramatic dichotomy. Here in the Midwest was a biome-scale transition, the transition between the woodlands of the east and the grasslands of the west. In the heart of this transition, the heart of the divide, was a special ecology, the tallgrass prairie. Far from monotonous, this landscape was dramatically diverse. The tallgrass was one of the great borderlands of early America, a mosaic bringing together starkly contrasting communities. Think of it, on either side of that divide, people had different possibilities and pursued different economies. On either side of that divide, people practiced different lifeways and invented different cultures. In addition to being one of the great ecological boundaries in North America, it was also an important transition zone for human cultures.
Historians have largely ignored this place as a central location in early American history, but that's wrong. For several generations surrounding the period of the colonial encounter, the diversity of this region in both cultural and ecological respects provided opportunities for new kinds of subsistence, as well as for strategic endeavors for the people that could move into this region and exploit them.
As an ecologist might say, what the region offered was a special and dynamic property inherent to transition zones: an edge effect. Writing in his classic text, Game Management, ecologist and early environmentalist Aldo Leopold first identified what he called the law of interspersion, the idea that areas of overlap among different plant communities, such as, say, forests and wetlands, were where many animals could thrive, taking advantage of multiple opportunities. Game is a phenomenon of edges, Leopold wrote, implying that animals maximized their energy in the locations where they could exploit multiple ecologies at the same time. The key was simultaneous access to more than one environmental type, and the greater richness of opportunities in these settings. During the period that we normally think of as early American history, the tallgrass prairie region was most certainly defined by an edge effect on a massive scale. Migrating here from the east in the early 1600s, groups like the Meskwaki and the Illinois moved purposefully into a zone of opportunity. No less than today, when huge fields of corn and soybeans convert the sun's energy into food and fuel, the plants of the tallgrass region produced massive energy streams in the pre-modern period. The big difference, however, was that these grasses themselves were not useful to humans as food. Instead, the humans needed an intermediary, an animal partner, to exploit this energy. It was the bison that could convert the raw energy of the grasses into usable calories and into many other products besides. Beginning in the 1500s, accompanying an important climate change, big bison herds grew in the eastern prairies for the first time. Now cultures like the Illinois and Meskwaki rose to power, inventing a brand new lifeway of pedestrian bison hunting in the tallgrass region to exploit this energy source. They ran after bison.
It was an extraordinary practice, and it shaped them. Bison hunting on foot required cooperation, specific seasonal patterns, and coordinated social structures. Most of all, it required certain specific kinds of work that was always organized according to strict conventions, and especially when it came to gender.
These patterns created great opportunity, but also great competition and eventually conflict. In the middle of this great cultural borderland, certain prairie groups maximized their use of the bison resource, merging old logics of indigenous military culture with the new demands of the bison economy to build great power. In particular, they adapted old practices of captive taking to meet the labor demands of bison production, capitalizing on the special circumstances of their region. When French fur traders opened a tannery in the Wabash River Valley in the early 1700s, the Illinois reached the apex of their regional power, exporting tanned bison hides that French administrators viewed as one of the most marketable commodities of North America. The problem was that they were not alone. The rise to power produced great rivalries and great competition. And while historians have ignored this context, it helped produce the violence of the Fox Wars, some of the most consequential violence of early American history. This history is mostly forgotten. Like the previous land cover of this region, the human history of indigenous power in the Midwest was largely erased. Moving through the landscape of the Midwest today, our eyes glaze over the industrial farming landscape, the enormous flat fields covered with essentially two species, corn and soy. We almost take it for granted.
But history can be recovered. we can appreciate the special ecology that used to define this place, one of the most important ecological borderlands of the continent. And once we do that, it's almost impossible to miss the significance of this ecology on the human history of our region. It's almost impossible to miss the dramatic story of Indigenous power that was entangled with the dynamics of this special region.
It is time for us to recover the unique story of the Prairie Midwest, the story of this important and forgotten edge effect.